Hey, this is Ross Bain with Role-Playing Public Radio. This is RPPR episode 149, Labyrinths and Mazes. Mazes and Labyrinths. Linear versus nonlinear scenario design. And with me, not as always, is Bill.
Hey, everybody. I live.
You do live. I wanted to get Bill on the podcast because he hasn't been on in a while, and I think this would be a good, fun discussion. But before we get into the scenario design, serious talk about this, I do have a bit of news.
Let me adjust my monocle.
Yes. Yes. I just want to let everybody know that you may have heard some news about Patreon and their pricing policy. That has been because basically on December 7th, they announced that they were going to change their pricing policy and basically make patrons eat all the credit card transaction fees, which was really going to suck if you backed a lot of people, because they're also going to do it per pledge. They weren't going to aggregate pledges anymore, which...
Yeah, I mean, the batching issue was the real kick in the fork.
Yeah, so if you back 10 people, instead of paying one fee... Well, actually, you don't pay any fees right now, because... Creators, we pay for it, and we're happy to do it because getting some money is better than getting no money. Please don't cancel your pledge. But yeah, so basically, instead, if you back 10 people a month at $1 each, you would only be there would only be one $10 transaction, and then Patreon.
Currently.
Yeah, currently. But what they were doing is splitting it into 10 transactions, and each one having a fee that would be 2.9% plus 35 cents. However, after universal outcry and basically from creators and patrons alike, they reverse course. They're not going to do that. Now, to be fair to Patreon, this was not a money grab on their part. I do believe that they made an honest mistake because they were trying to fix real issues with it. There were two real problems. One, people who signed up and then downloaded everything from a creator and then canceled their pledge before they would be charged, so literally stealing content, and that does happen. And then the other problem is double charge. If you signed up on the 29th of a month, you'd be in. Some creators are charged up front, like RPPR is charged up front. But if you sign up on the 29th, you get charged, $2 or $5 or whatever. And then on the first of the month, you get charged another $2 or $5 or whatever.
Yay.
And so that kind of sucks for those people. And so they were trying to solve that by doing it like every other monthly fee where or every other subscription service like Netflix or whatever, where you pay as you go on the anniversary when you sign up. But that obviously got rid of aggregating pledges, which is the real value in Patreon, and because of the network effect and all that. And they listened to everybody. So if I do know a handful of people have did cancel their pledge because of that, RPPR. But you don't have to anymore. So if you cancel because of that, please come back. And also we have a lot of great content on our Patreon anyway. Next month we're going to start back with Wad the Heck.
Good.
Yeah. Whoa, we've done a whole year, over a year of Palladium, and I think that's more than enough.
You're saying that like it was a preferable alternative.
What would you rather us do, Bill?
I don't know. I really don't know.
It's the sword of Damocles all over again.
Yep, pretty much. You could make Caleb review Pathfinder supplements.
I don't want Caleb to that's how you lose people from the podcast. That's how
fair.
Caleb, yeah. That's fair. I don't want to subject Caleb had so much problems with the shipping. Yeah.
Yeah. You can make anyone review Pathfinder supplements.
Yeah. Pathfinder supplements, again, you really have to go back.
They're actually well done.
They're not to say that they're perfect, but like comparing Pathfinder to, say, Palladium or old World of Darkness, like 1990s.
Yeah, you're mining rich veins. I'll give you that.
Yeah. So we're starting with Montreal by Night. We're going to do some of these by night books, city books. We'll see how long that goes. Then we might switch to some other supplements. I don't know. We'll just kind of feel it out. But it'll be really fun and exciting. We also have always fun on After Hours for Values of Fun. I know we're going to do a special After Hours, maybe as a bonus episode, because I found out about this evil Star Trek comic, Mirror Broken, Swole Trek as I call it, where Picard is a ripped goatee. Like everyone has sleeveless shirts and protein.
So much synth protein powder.
Yes. And
Strangely, it looks like they all skipped leg day because the pants still fit the same.
That's actually a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. They're really so.
Listeners, I've seen this now. Ross has shown a physical copy of it to me, and because I respect his investment, I did not shred it on site, but I have become your sin eater.
Yep.
I am the sacrificial lamb.
Well,
we all shall be.
We'll get there's 5. It's a 5 of a 5 issues are out of a 6 issue thing. But we have to talk about this. So that will be on an after hour. So that's just for the patrons.
Do you have to?
They're literally murder hobos.
I feel like you need to acknowledge the role of choice in this.
Okay, I want
to.
I am choosing to to because
that's good honesty on your part.
It's so insane. It's so insane. It
really is.
Yeah. So that will be fun.
Some people look away from the car wreck, Ross.
Yeah. I am. Yeah.
Not that person.
No, I'm not that person. I mean, I did expose Sean to the room recently. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Fun aside.
Yeah.
So back when Melissa and I first got together, I sort of screwed up bringing her into the whole bad movie culture because she in good faith sat down to watch The Room, and while I think I vaguely told her it was bad, I did not list any of the specifics. When we got to the second sex scene, we pretty much had to stop. But now she's all interested in seeing The Disaster Artist, and I'm like, that's going to make zero sense unless you've seen The Room. And then she disappears in a puff of cognitive dissonance or something. I don't know.
The Room is really 4 sex scenes, 3 of them in the first half hour.
Yep.
It's a tough sled.
Yeah. I mean,
for some people,
way up here, you've got the act of killing, and then right below that, The Room.
Well, in terms of bad, I wouldn't put it that high up, but in terms of B movies, Plan 9 from Outer Space, that's easy. Everyone can get behind that because that's just silly, ridiculous, and innocent.
Right. It's no Birdemic.
Birdemic is kind of in the middle of the scale because it's just got all those soul power.
The middle?
Yeah.
I think your Overton window for movies is broken.
Neil Breen movies. They're pretty bad, but Room's pretty high up there because,
for sure.
And even later on, even past the sex scenes, just some of those middle parts, just the alleyway scene, what? Why is even that? Anyways,
because football.
Yeah, because football, and it's not even football; they're just playing catch. See, we're getting off path a little bit, so we were kind of in a maze of off topic. So
that's a wonderful segue.
Thank you. So recently, I came up with this idea for this episode of linear scenarios versus nonlinear scenarios, and by linear, I mean basically the players have one path to go to. And you see this a lot in pretty straight things. The first thing that comes to mind to me is a wilderness survival thing. Mm-hmm. Can you get out of a dangerous place with limited resources?
Right.
There's dungeon crawls usually. I mean, it depends on the type of dungeon. If there's one thing at the end, if the dragon's at the other end in the cave and you're trying to get to that dragon, then it's linear. So nonlinear is obviously the opposite. There's a problem and there's multiple ways to resolve it. Like a murder investigation. Do you actually try to solve the murder? Do you frame someone for it? Or do you fail to find it altogether? Or do you find the murderer and realize he won't be brought to justice, so you kill him, you become, vigilante style, for example.
Swear to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or you go full Batman. And drop your Batmobile on it because that's how he rolls in the Justice League and Batman versus Superman. Just murder some people, Batman. Anyways, those are choices. That was a nonlinear design. I came with the idea for this episode because of a book I've started to read. I haven't finished yet, called The Labyrinth in Culture and Society: Pathways to Wisdom by Jacques Attali. And it's a book about labyrinths and mazes. Weird. And they talk about how the labyrinth is a linear thing. It's usually sort of a spiral-based design, and you're just trying to get to the center. And it's often used as a sort of metaphor for the pilgrimage, for the ascent to heaven. The path. Staying on the path from temptation. Mm-hmm. You see these everything from ancient Greek myth to cathedral designs. And then, of course, you have mazes, which are nonlinear. Video games where there's dead ends and traps and that kind of thing, and you can just fail to get through, or there's multiple ways out of the maze. And I thought that was a really interesting way of designing scenarios. So I talked to Bill about this, or I mentioned this to Bill, and so Bill, what are your initial thoughts on?
Well, I mean, for one, like, we got to put some scope around this because there's so much writing out there about, sort of impugning linearity in scenario design.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I think, like, the first thing we should do is maybe say, linear scenario design is not objectively a bad choice. It's a tool to be used in certain circumstances. And, we'll probably dig more into what those circumstances are. What I would sort of blow that out to say, though, what you've got to keep a careful handle on is linearity in campaign design. If you're going for a longer time, that's where you're more likely, I would say, to get into a problem. Like, that's where that sort of lack of choice will start to be felt more in a given scenario. I mean, especially if you're doing a one shot, but even a given scenario within a campaign, that's the first place of ground that I'll stake out is, like, linearity has its place.
And I agree. I totally agree with that, and I think that's a really good point. And I hadn't even thought about the individual game session versus the campaign, and that's actually a really interesting point. Because campaigns. I don't think you can have a longer game that is really satisfying if it's entirely predetermined.
Right.
The GM is not there telling the story to the players; they're creating a story with the players, and that means that you can't understand. You don't necessarily know how it's going to end, and that's an interesting point. I think. For me, like, I recently played a video game, Night in the Woods, and they have a side game in that called Lost Constellation. And in Lost Constellation, you're essentially playing this woman who's trying to get through the forest to the frozen lake. And there's the god of the forest, and there's all these the hunter and all these mythical creatures and beings that are standing in her way between that. And it's a very linear scenario, but it's very evocative because, for one thing, you don't know why she's doing this, or she just is very vague about why she's doing this. And then, it's kind of a cliche to say, but it's about the friends she makes along the way, in a sense. And I think that's another sort of major point about linear scenarios. It's not about what destination you're arriving at, because that's predetermined. It's right, but it's about how or why you're doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, especially as relates to scenario design, like, I think that's the first thing to make linear scenarios, when you choose to use them, really work. You've got to focus in, because the way you sort of phrased that dramatic question is important, right? As far as taking a fail forward approach, or essentially, like, measuring the cost. That's where both randomness and player choice come back into it, is, like, sort of, you can boil a template dramatic question out of both linear and nonlinear scenario design. In a linear scenario, you're necessarily kind of asking, what price are the players willing to pay to pursue the path of whatever their goal is? To kill this dragon, find this treasure, save this princess, whatever. Non-fantasy tropes also apply here. But, like, in a nonlinear scenario, it really becomes more about exactly what version of what are the players choosing as their own end goal, and what means do they choose to pursue it.
Yeah. Of course, I guess I should mention, in both these, we're assuming there is kind of a special case with RPGs in that there's always the chance that the players just fail along the way. Right. Like if there's always the TPK clause, I guess we should call. So we should acknowledge even in a linear scenario, there is sort of a branch. Yeah. Do the players just fucking die along the way? And I'm like, well, that's possible, because it's a game, and crit failures happen, as we see, especially in, like, games like Red Markets.
Those double sevens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so Red Market is actually a really good example because most of these jobs are, at first glance, pretty linear. Like you have to go to this place and do this thing and get back. And that then becomes like, in Red Market's obviously like, what are you willing to do to get the job done?
Yeah, it's always implying that question of what price are you willing to pay? Because even as like small branches open up, some Red Markets we've played in the last few months, the crew that I happen to be playing with, we had a car available, or actually a UPS truck, and it became a lot of sort of back of the envelope math of, well, do we think that this leg of the journey would potentially cost us more bounty than 1 unit of fuel would cost? So that becomes the dramatic question is, can you get enough economic efficiency out of this? Like, and that's of course the core theme of Red Markets is like, is your blood, sweat, and tears are you able to convert that into cold hard cash? The answer is usually yes, but not nearly enough.
Well, the question is, if your blood, sweat, and tears isn't enough, where can you find other sources of blood, sweat, and tears?
Red Markets.
Let's externalize those costs. In other words, tragedy of the commons, et cetera, et cetera.
If you get 6 people to bleed for you, and they each get 6 people to bleed for them,
another distinction I kind of think about is sometimes you can have a nonlinear scenario that looks like a linear scenario. So in Red Markets, there were several jobs. I think in the Brutalist there was the murder trial job where we had to the stated job was to escort a convict from point A to point B so they could go on trial, quote unquote, and then be executed. But we decided to no, it's nonlinear because we're going to fucking prove that they're innocent because we feel bad.
Right.
And, so you can kind of, question the underlying structure, which is a very kind of postmodern thing to do, And
yet for all of that, I feel like most of the GM communication I see online, Tumblr posts or Facebook or whatever, seem to revolve around that sort of, rejecting the premise sort of issues.
Yeah.
It's pretty common in this hobby.
That's true too. A lot of players do say, I don't want it's a linear story. For example, you've been shanghaied on a and the adventure is going to be on this island. It's like, no, I don't want to be shanghaied. Well, you've been shanghaied. Well, I let my character. Yeah, that's true. You can make a nonlinear adventure out of a linear adventure.
It's quite true.
So the question is, as a GM, how do you get the players to accept the premise, whether it's linear or nonlinear?
Right.
A lot of that, I guess, is just sort of table etiquette and communicating what the players want to do, and sort of So it's not necessarily nothing you can do in scenario design, but just communicating with the players. You're going to be shanghaied. This is what's going to happen.
I think for a thing like that, the idea of starting something at the latest point possible, and those sort of pacing techniques come in a whole lot. But let's see.
Well, I think also we should also talk a little about nonlinear, obviously. So nonlinear is basically the way you say that is that there is a problem. There is something that causing your characters to go into action to resolve something. But ambiguity, I think, is important because the question then becomes a maze, you have multiple, you left, forward, or right. And so for the players in story, converting that to story means here's this problem, this town is suffering or whatever.
Right.
Do you solve it with violence, by killing the bandits that are attacking them? Do you solve this with stealth, by finding out where the bandits are and why they're doing this and resolving that mystery?
Do you solve this with currency arbitrage?
Yeah.
An RPPR kind of answer?
Or do you manipulate the entire kingdom in order to make the economic means of banditry infeasible? We're going to start cheese smuggling. It'll work great. Or mustard smuggling, sorry. to get the RPPR added right. So, so the question then becomes like the players choose what they think is possible, or either what is most morally. Like players also have to make their own value judgments. Like, do we do the thing that is most virtuous, or do we do the thing that is the most effective, like the one we think we have the greatest chance of some kind of success?
Right. I think, so we mentioned a few minutes ago, or at least I did. I don't know. You kind of came along with it, that there are places to use linear scenario design.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think actually one of those has to do with knowing your players, because a nonlinear scenario tends to have so much more emphasis on information gathering and sort of understanding whether you're making the right choice or not.
The procedural, you'd say?
Yeah.
The procedural questions?
That like... It sort of came as a surprise to me when I started, running a lot of games that had Renee as a player. And I'm not picking on Renee here. This is perfectly valid as a value system. But like, in terms of a storytelling medium, she doesn't really enjoy that kind of ambiguity, which made for a really interesting fit in, the Armitage Files. Which I dare say was sort of a campaign that was kind of about ambiguity.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, like if you know that you have a bunch of people that don't really, they get to deal all day maybe with questions of, am I doing the correct thing right now? Like, if you're running games for a group composed entirely of freelancers, maybe they'd be okay with, someone telling them, here, take this sword and go hit this orc.
Yeah, that's true. Especially if you've structured the campaign to be like orcs are unquestionably evil, they're threatening everyone, and they need to be stopped.
Yes,
and then the linear scenarios go sabotage their fortress or whatever, or go slay assassinate their commander, so they don't know what to do, or they don't know how to fight. Then it becomes like a procedural thing, a question of tactics and technique and efficacy.
Yeah. And those sort of like very fine-grained, there's still a lot of player decisions in there, but you're worrying about evaluating what is the right thing to do right now, not what is the right thing to do on some, whether it's a moral principle or just, is this the right thing to do in an efficacious sense? Well, right now, I know I need to flank this orc.
Yeah, exactly. But even those stories, they questions of like morality or virtue or honor, I guess in some ways, come up because if you think of like military stories, what are the most dramatic moments? Where it's not like, oh, we need to flank this orc. It's like, oh, I'll hold them off, you know, and like then it's not necessarily the most rational choice, but it's like, oh, that guy's the squire's in danger, and I'm the one who recruited him. I feel responsible for him, so I'm going to let my character almost certainly die in order to save this person who is less powerful than I am. And that so it becomes it switches from procedural to drama. To a dramatic question, and there we go. The core of the linear story. How do you do this? What is the cost of progress?
Right. Yeah, that's actually something when we were talking about beforehand. I started thinking that like, while this isn't a perfect analogy, like linear stories tend to map a bit more onto most of your more iconic characters, where they have some sort of iconic ethos, and the question is, can they hold true to that ethos and solve the dramatic question in front of them? Where like a nonlinear story reinforces more dramatic archetypes of this is the situation you are in. How are you changed by the choices you make in that situation? Yeah.
And so the linear versus nonlinear isn't even necessarily a question of genre or story type. You could tell the exact same story in a linear or nonlinear way. It's just sort of like, what do you want to focus the game about? Like, what do you want the players to be really like focused on? Because obviously in any given role-playing game you can't like focus on everything perfectly, then you're not really focusing on anything. So
we already have that role-playing game. It's called Life, and you're already playing it.
Oh wow, yeah, it's pay to win too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Free to play, pay to win. So I think the thing is, as a game master, you kind of like want to vary it up too. So you want to do scenarios where it's like you're really testing the character's virtues, or you want to have a variety too. I think, like you said, I think campaigns need to have some variety, need to have some sort of nonlinear elements to it. But like make it more about challenging everything about the player. I mean, of course, it depends on genre too. You know, if it's a more laid back game, you know, if you're just dungeon crawling or whatever, certainly the Ashen Stars game I'm running right now has been pretty laid back. We're kind of going over sci-fi tropes and just having fun with it. Like the first adventure I'm setting up was actually pretty non-linear for it, which I actually have two groups for it. So I guess we kind of analyze these scenarios and see whether they're linear or non-linear.
Sure.
So the first one in Ashen Stars, the players were hired by this planet to go check up on xenoarchaeological excavation on the moon, and the people on this planet sent up a spaceship to go check out because there's some weird signal coming from the moon that they just discovered.
Were there cat women and giant spiders?
No, actually, it wasn't quite that campy. But the players then went there after doing some investigation on the planet to learn more about what was going on, who was up, who had been sent up. You know, there's different factions on the planet, all vying for political control. And then when they got there, they found out there was an alien artifact. And by tampering with this artifact, they activated the defense cyborgs, basically, you know.
Yep.
And they had to help everyone evacuate. But then they had this weird alien artifact, and rather than give it to the people who'd been digging for it, you know, they decided, well, it's too dangerous. Let's go take it to an expert to analyze and find out what's going on.
It belongs in a museum.
Well, there's like we don't trust these people on this planet to keep it because
cultural hegemony.
Yeah. So I gave them two choices at the end. So, well, there's a university of xenoarchaeologists. You take it there. And then there's a renowned xenoarchaeologist on this death planet. It's a death world. You know, it's really not a nice, we'll go to the death world. Because, you know, the university sounds dangerous because there could be
political infighting.
So, how would you categorize that? Based on, and you can ask questions, obviously. Is it a linear or non-linear?
I mean, at a blush, it sounds like relatively linear with some, you know, branching choice points, but they tend to be more like, you know, it maybe in that, like, what do I want to say, that sort of BioWare model, which is not, you know, that's not criticism per se, but it's like there are moral choices here, but the overall thrust of the story is still going to be the same direction. It's more, you know, up until that last one, you know, who you are when you get there, more so than what's going to happen.
I would agree with the linear thing because the whole thing was to get the artifact and rescue the people. Well, rescue the people and get the artifact. So the artifact was kind of like a bonus. They could have left it behind, you know, if they had fucked up some. If they made poor decisions or something like that. So,
or if they had, you know, respected the culture that they came from.
Well, the cyborgs were all like defense drones. They were kind of like podmorphs. So they were like long dead ancient species.
Yeah, so, I meant the people that the moon.
Oh,
belong. Yeah. Anyway,
well, no one lived on the moon. They just sent. It was a vacuum moon. The people from the planet were on the moon digging it up. So it was a long dead species. So there was no cultural appropriation there, except in the sense of digging up an ancient species. Shit.
Right.
But there were no current. Yeah. So I would say it's linear, but then they made it non-linear at the end because I was expecting them to stay on the planet and be like, well, what are we, you know, and return to the people that have paid them to do that, and they're like, no. Let's go figure out what this is doing. Okay, you're technically committing space theft. Like, yeah, that's fine.
It's more space fraud or space breach of contract.
Yeah.
But you got to watch out for those space breaches of contract because your financial atmosphere will just vacate out into the vacuum.
So there's another group of player characters, and so at the same time they were Group A was dealing with that. Group B was hired by one of the factions to deal with this growing group of squatters that were showing up on the planet as part of, and there's basically space Burning Man on this planet. You know, there are just a bunch of space hippies and hipsters on this planet, and someone was inviting them and telling them there was a great party going on, and the faction that was living near them is like, they're stealing our water, and we're very peaceful. We don't want to, you know, just shoot them or whatever, but can you deal with this problem? And so the players investigate. they reclaim the water. They take over the dam, and so they can reroute the water back to the people who hired them. Then they find out that there's a team of mercenaries that have been secretly hired to lure all these people here. And so they go after the mercenaries, and they capture them after a fight. And so the next adventure, they're going to investigate who hired the mercenaries. Why was someone trying to bring all these mercenaries or all these people here? Which seems to make no sense. So how would you categorize that?
I mean, that occurs to me to sound somewhat more nonlinear in that one, it's a more open-ended question to approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is this happening? Please go find out, instead of, there is a thing being dug up. Please go interdict the thing.
That's true. And like the players, they made value. It was a question. It was a mix of tactics and ethics, as they chose to use more, they choose to be sneaky about it for the most part. Like they snuck into the dam to take it over. They also snuck into the crashed spaceship, which had the reactors that the squatters were using, and they secretly sabotaged it so they could turn off the juice at any time. So they try to use unconventional methods and tactics to do this rather than so they were being underhanded. But they weren't willing to. They could have just, started launching tear gas at everyone and rounding them up, or they could have sided with these people and like tried to coerce the faction into taking over. Like, oh, there's more of them than there are of you, so why should we listen to you? I would agree with that as more of a nonlinear thing. But I think they're going into a linear one, which is find out who this guy is, who the employer is, which will run at some point. So
I think you're actually kind of illustrating an important point there. So a lot of what's thrown out as sort of invective against, linearity, I think almost doesn't apply to the way we're talking about it here, because like, while there's a straight progression of linear events per se, what I notice in what you're describing is you're not expecting anybody to take a given solution there. You're still letting them line up what they feel like, maybe in a smaller possibility space, but nonetheless, they still maintain that choice of how they want to address the problem in both circumstances.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I think the people in the first adventure, the moon adventure, obviously the question was, the dramatic question was them how they work as a team, because it was the first adventure of the campaign. So like, there's like who are as people, and like how do they resolve problems? And they were pretty like snarky, but they were also like willing to risk themselves to save the NPCs and stuff like that. And I think that's that's good. That's character defining. They were literally doing the first work to define their characters. But yeah, in the other adventure, they were also showing who they were by choosing out of this wide variety of things to use sabotage and espionage to resolve their problems. So, those are good points. So, I want to go back to the campaign ideas too. Like,
sure.
I think when you're looking at a campaign, like you want to have this overall story arc, like how are you going to define it to make sure it's always non-linear? Like the obvious campaign is like, there's a big bad evil guy, go kill him, Right. So how do you make that non-linear?
So to sort of loop back around, I think for a lot of these, the idea of non-linearity, like you're sort of hitting a breakpoint between information gathering and information execution. Like to your point about pacing these two types of scenarios earlier, like you could probably do worse. It might get a little predictable, but if you ended up essentially running a campaign made out of, shared scenarios or shared pairs, where it's like, in one scenario, you're taking a nonlinear approach where you know what the problem is, but you're out gathering information about how best to approach it. And then the second scenario, you're going and acting on what you've discovered. I've been thinking about that like a lot when I've been watching genre films and reading genre fiction lately. How much of the tropes of different genres are sort of about the shorthand of real world information gathering. Really specifically, it's really early, like into the run of this film, so I won't say much, but like I saw The Last Jedi when it opened yesterday. And like it took, I stepped back and thought about it for a second, that like if you considered all the information gathering that's involved in that film and information disparities, then like that sort of breeds nonlinearity, because how do you go about finding those things out? How do you go about acting against people who don't want you to find things out?
Okay.
Et cetera, et cetera.
So going with the generic go get the big bad evil guy plot, so you start out with you could start out like how is that even possible? You know,
right.
Like we have to find his secret weakness or its secret weakness.
Say that you know that no one has killed him yet because he is mostly impervious to damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does he have some sort of a secret weakness? If so, how do you track it down? Mm-hmm. Beyond that, even more just sort of, day-to-day block and tackle kind of stuff. Like if you're going to kill the guy, you need to know where he's going to be.
Yeah. And there's also other things could come up too. Now that I'm thinking about it, like, someone who helped us in the past has been captured. Should we go and rescue them? Mm-hmm. They might be helpful later on, but they might have been tortured into being useless. But do we let our allies, do we let our friends just suffer so we can focus on the goal? You know,
right.
Like, in that case, then you have to go do your side quest, you know.
At what price victory?
At what price victory? Yeah, exactly. So, because I mean, that's the thing about role-playing games versus like, other forms of storytelling. A lot of it, the times it's about this central conflict, and can it be resolved is the question, because it's a game,
right?
And the outcome is not predetermined.
Yep.
Hopefully.
That's a different kind of linearity, which we're just going to say, please don't.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's all those storytelling games that have those kind of play with those kind of conceptions, but
when you're doing that, you're all signing on to it from the beginning.
But they're not usually, like, the bulk of role-playing games are still in this kind of model. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of it is kind of like going back to sort of the wargaming roots. It's a war. Yeah. You know, it's not like every session is one battle. You know, a procedural thing, but the war itself is like, how do you define victory?
Right. Like, not only are we getting together to play imaginary cops and robbers with dice, we're getting together to play imaginary what-if cops and robbers with dice.
Yeah. And I think, you know, obviously, a lot of the times we advise things that are focused on your individual players and what they respond to the most.
Yeah.
And so, for you, when you're designing scenarios, obviously, I think there should be some variety, because if it's always, this guy is telling you to do a thing, you have to go do the thing, that gets really boring after a while. But if it's all like, it's a wilderness of mirrors and you don't know what the fuck's going on, or there's a problem somewhere. Oh, geez. Again, you know, like, it just could, like, that could get tedious too.
Yeah.
But I think also my original point was to say, tailor it to your players. Mm-hmm. So, like, you know, you mentioned Renee, like, obviously she's not so fond on the ambiguous procedural stuff. Like, what is the most effective technique to do right now to gain more information? But you also, and then you have players like, you know, Tom, who are more action oriented, like they want to kill bad guys, you know, and that kind of thing. And so you need to structure these things so that it's interesting, but I think not just in the way that they expect.
Right.
You know, to sort of challenge them in a way that feeds into it. So, I
mean, if I was to boil it down and get pithy with it, I would probably think of it this way. Like, you can sort of frame, generally speaking, nonlinear ambiguity as asking the question, how do you know that?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
But it's a strong spice. It's balsamic vinegar. It's fish sauce. And, like, you know, some of us eat a lot of Southeast Asian cuisine. And so, like, bring the fish sauce on.
Yeah.
And some people, they feel like it smells like rotten feet. So...
and you can also, like, I haven't seen the new Punisher show on Netflix, but my understanding that is it relates to Frank Castle's military background, and so he's investigating a crime, and so, like, it's the Punisher, so he shoots bad guys, but, like, he has to find the bad guys to shoot, and then
Wow.
Yeah, it's so for a Tom player, that's actually an interesting challenge. Can you find the bad? Who are the bad? And also defining them. Who's the bad guy? Who is worth being punished?
I mean, it turns out they're not just like coming to you with a sign on their back that says "shoot me,"
or they're not just standing in a room guarding a pie. You know, like
ooh, those pie guards, they've got it coming.
Yeah, those orcs guarding pies in 10x10 rooms. With, they're a scourge, and we need to get rid of them. Yeah. I think that's another thing. Is also like what is your like what level of morality are you trying to be a vigilante for? Like
right.
if because I understand a lot of it. My understanding is that it's going back to his background as a special forces guy, and so he's fighting other military people, and so like. What point is that guy too dirty that, you know, even though he's wearing a uniform, he should, you know, if he was just following orders, do you shoot him? You know, do you shoot everyone who's in your way, or do you use non-lethal takedowns for, which is a lot harder and putting yourself at risk?
Yeah, but if you're in the BioWare game, then you get the good ending.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Which is a green beam instead of a blue beam.
Yeah.
I do actually make a lot of Mass Effect jokes in the Ash and Sars campaign. So,
well, suddenly my like sadness that I'm not able to be around for that. It's ebbing.
The leader of the friendly cultists who believe that a former space hero is a messiah. The leader's name is DLC for Divine Love Commander. There's a character named Micro Raxaxion. He.
Really wish the listeners could see expressions. I really wish they could.
That's just kind of a preview of the anecdotes. So,
great.
Yeah. I think it's also, responding to the players too, in terms of like defining, what is the not linear, you know, like, listening to them to trying to figure out what your scenario is. Like maybe you set up a scenario, you're not sure if it's going to be linear or non-linear, you know, like do the players, because, you know, some players will look at a maze and be like, well, we just climb over the walls or we bust the walls down. Like, I just go straight. I have wall busting at 5+5.
Caleb comes up with Operation Color Mammal.
I find the engineer of the labyrinth, and I marry his daughter. So he gives, you know, like that's what I do, you know.
Yes, the winning move was not to play.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, did that happen? I mean, you mentioned the Armitage files earlier. Did that happen a lot in terms of like, because the initial setup is very nonlinear because it's like, for one thing, like there is a problem, you know, Dr. Armitage's weird notes,
right?
But then we have to pick what we think is the plot hook.
Well, so So basically, here was my cycle for that. We would come to the end of a document. I would, you know, this maybe isn't the best from like best practices, but I had to live in reality as far as these scenarios go. So like, I would ask you guys what element from the next note you wanted to go after. And I'd familiarized myself with that note, and I might have an idea, like sort of in the larger campaign sense, what it was ticking towards, but I basically made no decisions about what any of the players in that document were doing until you guys told me who you wanted to go after. And then I looked around at what we had done recently to say, well, okay, so if I made it conform to, you know, what would sort of vary the story up the most. If you had gone after someone and it turned out to be the main conspirator in the previous adventure, then whatever you go after this next time is going to be more tangentially related. Or I don't think I ever like turned it into an out and out red herring, just because red herrings are not usually stellar choices in investigative games.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of game. Like, if that's sort of one of the themes is the wilderness of mirrors kind of thing, where you're like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, like you need to have some dead ends.
To a certain degree, I mean, they're again a very powerful spice, especially in a game like Gumshoe that's about resource management. There's a whole lot of feel bad in we sunk a lot into this thing that was nothing.
Yeah.
I'll save that for red markets.
I mean, yeah, I maybe that because that I think the dead end is a dead end, like it's the end of the game. Like, so if you made it to be like, here's all these clues. The challenge is interpreting them correctly. So like, is it Steve or Dan who's that is the traitor?
Right.
You have enough clues, you can make a case either way, and then the players have to choose who's the traitor. Who's the mole inside.
And it turns out all along it was Dan, and you chose incorrectly, and he completed his ritual, and Shub-Niggurath eats you.
Well, I was just thinking he defected to the Soviets, and bad things happened. But
that's a little easier.
Yeah. Not necessarily like apocalyptic, but again, I'm thinking of Tinker Tailor. So
yeah.
So how much of the conspiracy for Armitage Files did you predefine and was solid, or how much did you mold around our choices, or especially with the choosing the clues in the documents?
Much more to the latter than the former.
Okay.
I was getting as close. There's actually in the Armitage Files, the whole book, there's a pretty great essay by Steve Dempsey about if you wanted to go so far as to fully improvise Gumshoe, how you and you as a GM and a table full of players who were into that could go for it. I didn't go quite that far, but I wanted to go as far.
So there
as
were some rooted elements.
Could. Yeah, but very, very few. Basically, just that the documents were all related, and that they were different elements of a larger working being performed.
Okay,
that's. Aside from just sort of that overall framing device, each thing in its own right, I would wait until you guys picked something. I would sit down, begin to sketch it out. I would usually flip into the Hideous Creatures section from Ken Writes About stuff and try to find something new to put a different kind of spin on that seemed at least related to what that part of the larger working was supposed to be. But yeah, I mostly took a very responsive approach to that.
More of a nonlinear thing. So it was kind of a consistent pattern of starting nonlinear, but then after that initial thing of then it honed in on a linear thing.
Right. You could make a choice, and maybe it's you find a place that you need to assault to disrupt something, or who to go after. There's still the choice of method and all of that. But that almost goes to what I was saying a few minutes ago about doing a paired scenario, or even just paired sessions of the same overall scenario of you present the players at the beginning with essentially this open envelope of possibility space, and as they make choices, it collapses down to, at some point, you can never have absolute certainty, but enough wherever that line in the sand is for you as a player, or you and the other players collectively, to say, all right, I'm not 100%, but I think this is how we deal with this.
Yeah.
And you go, take the micro bits and pieces that move around in pursuing that approach. You try to, line it up against what are the capabilities of this group as a group.
Yeah. It's the nuts and bolts of storytelling, setup and then payoff.
Yeah.
And for role-playing games, that's defining a problem, a conflict, and then resolving that conflict.
Yeah.
So you say, here's something not good going on, or you want to change something, or there's some call to action, and then
ninjas have kidnapped the president.
Yeah, or great. Sorry, wait. Never mind. I'm thinking about the Unknown Armies campaign that was proactive. We want to change reality in a pretty big fucking way.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Okay, and then we narrowed down to we need to do this and this and this and this and this ad infinitum. And we started resolving it, because the whole thing is to get, I think the role-playing game, we're all looking for the payoff. We're all looking for the moment where the dice roll really matters and there's context to it. It's building context. The most of the work, I won't say the work, but most of the game is building enough context to have a great payoff. And so it's not that you got a nat 20 on a bad guy. It's you got the nat 20 on that asshole who is standing between you and the treasure, or your final goal or who had wronged you earlier.
Usually who had wronged you earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, as players of role-playing games, to an individual, we are petty and have long memories when it comes to slights.
Or alternately, how you fail and like you get a crit failure and like you explode. Like that's why we play the games, because of these payoffs that we remember and talk about later, and even the games that get derailed, I mentioned Shanghai earlier. That was still kind of that was like a mini entire story arc in of itself. The short unhappy life of young Conrad Mueller, of Aaron's like, I will not be Shanghai. This is the line in not in the sand but on the boat that I will not cross, and I will fight a shark to the death to define myself. And he did, and he
spoilers, the shark won.
The shark did win, and we still talk about it years later, or in Lady Gaga 2.0 Cyberpunk, it was our we have this great dramatic fight and we're like, no, we're just gonna shoot everybody. And so sometimes it's there was a setup, but then there was an ironic reversal, and that like we just fucking destroyed everything instead of having the big dramatic cinematic fight. We're like, nah, it's fine.
It's just a different kind of cinema.
Yeah, exactly. So linear versus nonlinear, they're all tools. Like nonlinear, I think. It seems to be what we're saying is that it's better for the setup than for the payoff, at least in terms of, and I don't believe that's 100% true, but I don't know. Is that?
Well, so here's the thing, like you can probably have the payout come straight out of a nonlinear, scenario, but then it's mostly just answering a question of information.
Yeah.
Like, if there's still something to be done, it's almost, if you want to take like the heist approach to it, say, the nonlinear approach is, who do you bring into this? What, do you need a safecracker or a hacker or, maybe both, but the sort of gathering of the team in the same way, like the gathering of those individuals into a team is a lot like the gathering of information. And then the linear part is, I know I've said this a lot, but like it's the execution portion. There'll be, interesting things that happen along the way there. And like, now that I've dug myself into this metaphor, it just reminds me how much I want to play Blades in the Dark, because it just stands this whole thing on its head.
Caleb's been reading that too, actually. And I have a copy of it. That's definitely something, we don't have time this year to do it, but definitely next year that sometime in the spring, I think we'll definitely do that. After I finish Ashen Stars and your work schedule frees up a little bit, because you and Caleb and me would be great for Blades in the Dark. Now that I mentioned, I just said that, I just thought of a way that's the reverse of that.
Okay,
and that would be sort of. You start as a tight, narrow situation, but then it opens up to dramatic possibilities, sort of chaos. So nonlinear is more chaos, more ambiguity. So think of a revolution. So it's linear to begin with. You have to build up allies. You have to figure out ways to weaken the existing country. And then you have to launch the coup d'etat, or the revolution, whatever you want to call it. And then...
How do you win the peace?
Yeah, exactly. Like now that you have a country or a nation in turmoil because you just guillotined the tyrant and Aunt Mary and all the other courtiers. What do you do next?
Yeah,
and so with that in mind, then it opens up into a nonlinear thing. Do you go to top? And so it's not an ironclad law, but like it's that's almost like, to be fair though, that's actually like it's linear to begin with, then nonlinear once you win the revolution, but then once you make your choices, you get narrowed down to linearity again, because like, oh, we're going to go democracy, we're going to do this. Okay, well, you have to defeat all these other factions, and then you have to solidify your hold over the country. And then, there's Napoleon. Well, you got to deal with that asshole. And so, you're really right on with that alternating thing. Like,
I mean, this is sort of a weird way to take it, but like, so there's a 4-part model that's actually used in discussing like how to operate as a fighter pilot. And it's, I believe, orient, observe, decide, act. And that's basically what you're doing. You can kind of drive or draw a line through the middle of that to look at, nonlinearity and linearity, because at first you're, observing, you're orienting. Where am I? And also observing what choices are available to me from this point in my context. Using that information, you decide what action to take. And then the linear part is, doing that action. He said, returning to the point.
Do the thing.
Yeah.
All right. That's a good point. So, so these are, this is just, again, I haven't even finished this book yet on Labyrinths. So, maybe we'll do another episode when I do finish it. But
on sidewalks.
Yeah.
And dare we say it, railroad tracks.
Ooh. But yeah, I mean, they talk like already at the beginning of the book, there's a ton of things I want to look up now. Like they talk about the myth of the labyrinth, obviously, Theseus and all that. And they talk about, Herodotus talked about the labyrinths of the 12 kings, in Egypt and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, there's a whole bunch of ancient labyrinths and shit that I barely know anything about. I kind of look that shit up.
And also how there used to be like great big giant axes with labyrinths carved onto them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's where the term comes from, labyrinths. And yeah, they talk a little bit about that. So obviously this was the only reason I got the book too was as research for Ruin. So weird.
Drink.
Yeah. And we'll probably do another episode once we do finish the book and have some time to digest it. And Bill, if you want to read it after I'm done.
Yeah.
I got a used copy too that's great. It's got all these underlined passages and footnotes and crazy person things. Like it's almost a handout from Armitage Files already. So it's been pretty great. So but when we get back, we'll have shout outs and anecdotes. So. And we're back, and I probably won't even use Vaporwave for this episode, although that's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I feel like you're probably lying.
No, I'm really into lo-fi hip-hop right now. Have you listened to any of that? They're like streaming stations on YouTube and Spotify, and I'll send you a link.
All right.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it's very chill and very calming, especially when you're stressed out about it.
So that sounds great.
Yeah. So for shout-outs, first one is obviously going to be The Labyrinth in Culture and Society, Pathways to Wisdom by Jacques Attali, as this was the basis of the episode. It's been a fascinating read so far. It's getting a little new agey that I'm reading into it about like the labyrinth represents the collective unconsciousness. It's kind of Jungian interpretation of them, but it's, as gaming fodder, there's just in the first 30 pages there've been a ton of interesting things in it. Yeah. So it references everything. It talks about Doom and the Theseus, and the Minotaur and that kind of thing. So
okay.
Yeah.
So I thought we were going to go into ripping and tearing.
No, the guy is the author is French, but so he calls Doom a slugathon, and I'm like, all right, I dig that term actually. So I don't know where you got it, but good on you. You've been listening to some podcasts lately. Yeah,
I sure have. So actually, one that I got back into, I was originally into it back when RPPR first started. It was one of those back in that hallowed year of 2007. Is Retronauts, which is a retro gaming podcast. They pretty loosely define retro gaming like anything that's pretty much at least 10 years old.
So like original Xbox by now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this podcast, I think they've got 10 years, of backlog at this point with some gaps in the middle because most of the participants were originally 1UP staffers back at 1UP.com when that was a website. And now they're out on their own, doing a Patreon funded thing. Basically, the main guy doing it, his name is Jeremy Parrish, also has a YouTube channel with a bunch of great retrospectives. Recently, because like it's great stuff to just sort of put on and have as semi interesting noise while like taking care of a baby and stuff. But like he's walking game by game through the like Game Boy releases chronologically. So starting in 1989. And
wow.
Yeah. There's a lot of really rough stuff in there.
Yeah.
I feel for him.
God, there's a couple hundred games, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big list. Wow.
I think he's like in the mid 100s and he's through part of 1990.
Wow. I'll download a couple episodes that listen to that because we're going to PAX South in a couple weeks. That's January 12th through the 14th in Austin or San Antonio. Yeah, San Antonio, Texas. So we'll be there.
Yeah.
So check us out there. By the way, I should have put that in the news, but whatever. You know now if you've been listening all this time. We'll of course record an after hours episode to talk about it after we're done. But yeah, it will record some panels too. So yeah, it'll be cool. Anyways, my next shout out is something I've been watching a lot of for some reason, Ultimate Beastmaster on Netflix, which is kind of like Ninja Warrior Sasuke. It's a competition obstacle course type of show. What's interesting is they shoot it for 6 countries.
Yeah.
And there's 2 competitors from 6 countries in each episode, and one makes it to the finale at the end. So there's 9 people make it for the final episode. And they've already got the second season out. The second season has different. Like the first season I really enjoyed because they had Terry Crews as the announcer, and he's just a great charismatic guy. And the announcers on season 2, I can't even remember their names, but they're really kind of duds. But they changed the obstacles up, so that's interesting. And it's kind of interesting because for me as a game designer, I'm like, well, how did they engineer this, and how are they doing that? Oh, look at the differences in how they design and how they're scoring points between season 1 and season 2. They're learning, and but as an obstacle course, it's really weighted towards climbing. So like for some weird reason, the world climbing champions are doing really well in the.
I was gonna say because I remember like Melissa watching this for a while and me kind of halfway watching it, and like it left me with the impression that like when the apocalypse comes, like mountain climbers will be who survive.
I mean, to be fair, climbing does seem like a really useful skill.
Right. Well, let alone like it's a pretty comprehensive full body workout. Like the climbers do great at all the other parts too.
Yeah, they do. There's a lot of jumping. There's a lot of upper body strength. A lot of I mean, it is varied. But it's a kind of show you can watch without paying 100% to. And for me, it's just like. I've been stressed about work and other things lately, so this has been very, chill, very relaxing. Not quite the visual Ambien that British Bake Off is, but that's how Caleb describes Bake Off.
He's not wrong. Also, quick unscripted shout out if you're looking for another hit of that kind of stuff and haven't gotten there yet. We're really enjoying the Big Family Bake Off show, or no Cook Off show, or something like that. I don't know. It's basically the Great British Baking Show, but also with families and not exclusively baking.
Okay. Sounds cool. What is it on?
Netflix.
Oh, it's on Netflix. Is it a Netflix original? Or is it
maybe,
something that they
or it might
licensed?
be borrowed from the Beeb. I don't.
All right.
The thing about it being visual ambient is I don't have to pick up a lot of the details.
All right. That's fair.
Cook delicious food.
It's kind of the point. Yeah. You've been listening to another podcast too, right?
Yeah. I've put my ears through their paces lately. So like these guys, need a shout out, but one of the first nonfiction podcasts from Night Vale Presents is I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats, which is Jeffrey Fink, the writer of Night Vale and Alice Isn't Dead, like talking song by song through the Mountain Goats album All Hail West Texas with John Darnielle, who frequently is the Mountain Goats. Since Caleb put me on to John Darnielle's fiction, I was pretty interested in this to begin with. And if you've, read or listened to an audiobook of Universal Harvester or Wolf in White Van, then if you would like to take that sort of that feeling of being in Unknown Armies, but not knowing you're in Unknown Armies, that those books kind of give you, and condense them down into 3-minute singer-songwriter songs. you're going to be there. And like,
all right.
They also have a lot of good conversation. They're getting like different artists to produce a cover of each song on the album, and then they're selling the album. So like,
interesting.
It's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's cool. I'll have to check that out. That actually is really cool. Another time what Sarah been getting into is Killing Floor 2, because co-op first-person shooters are my
jam.
Yeah, they are my jam. They're doing a seasonal event right now, Christmas themed.
No Overwatch.
Well, that's not co-op. That's competitive. I mean, I know they have co-op modes, but that's kind of a sideshow compared to the main.
Well, it's 6v6, so it's there are 5 other. You're cooperating with almost as many people as you're competing with.
Yeah, no.
All right.
I like.
Okay.
Yeah. I played some Overwatch. I have it.
I know.
I just can't. Yeah.
I was there when you first Overwatched.
So Killing Floor 2, they're doing a holiday Christmas theme. They've released a new boss. It's basically a mega bloat. And they've added new weapons. I've been trying different perks. I'm actually really into Gunslinger right now, which is pistols, headshotting little guys and running around, because the Gunslinger's faster than the other perks. So you can run faster, so you can just run and gun. So that's adds a little bit of survivability. So it's pretty, it's fun, and it's co-op. And they added the chicken suit, the only cosmetic DLC you will ever need. It's $5, but you can shoot zombies while wearing a chicken suit. What else do you need?
Yeah, I mean,
like that's it. Like,
shut it down, everybody.
I mean, they had another cosmetic DLC that I was really tempted to get, where you wear cardboard armor, like cardboard boxes.
That's not a chicken suit.
It's not a chicken. Yeah, I didn't get it.
By definition, it is.
It is not. I didn't get it because I waited for the chicken suit. Now I have the chicken suit. There's no point in wearing anything.
Now you can die happy.
Yeah. Many times, in fact, because I'm not super great. Let's see here. Did you have any other? Oh, there was a movie.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about the movie.
Right.
In the main episode.
So just to wind back a little bit, one of the use cases actually for a linear scenario, it strikes me, if you've got a really stinking weird game or really stinking weird setting specifically, that's like a linear scenario to kick things off is sort of a great choice, because mostly you're just sort of the attraction is getting your players exposed to this weirdness. Now, this is the critical one to not turn into a campaign, because, well, just Google Tour de Realms and you'll find out all the reasons not to do that. But I was thinking back about linear games that I've run, like Don't Rest Your Head and the like of that. And thinking about that reminded me, like, structurally of a Martin Scorsese movie from the early 80s, After Hours, which is basically a New York financial agent guy ends up going to meet a girl that he meets, I think, randomly in a cafe somewhere down in Soho. And apparently, like, I've heard generally that, New York in the late 70s and early 80s was sort of a weird place, considering, like, it's sort of that, mise en scene that gives us Ghostbusters and stuff like that as well. But, like, for a movie that is basically about, man, parts of New York are really flipping weird. I cannot listen to the song Is That All There Is to a Fire now, because it's in this movie and context. So it's really weird. Martin Scorsese's a pretty great director.
Oh yeah, I think I mentioned I've gave this a shout out a while ago, but I watched for the first time this year Bringing Out Your Dead, which is a 1999 Scorsese movie starring Nicolas Cage as a paramedic. Have you heard of that?
No.
But it's also about New York being weird.
Right.
It's Nicolas Cage being weird. He's haunted by the ghost of someone who died he tried to save. And but he has various partners. One is John Goodman, one is Ving Rhames, and one is Tom Sizemore. I forgot what order they go in. And so it's him dealing with the inhabitants of that he has to, the junkies and the regular people and the criminals that he has to save, Did
you see this before or after Somewhere Lane?
This is before, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It kind of sounded like it.
Yeah. It's a really good movie. It's actually like Nicolas Cage can be a good actor.
We've all seen it happen.
Yeah. When he's paired with a good director who can tell him what to do. And this is certainly, I think, one of his strongest performances. And like, it's a great movie. Like, it's criminally underrated. Like,
all right.
So yeah, definitely. But it's obviously darker because, you know, a lot about death, weirdly enough.
I mean, actually, After Hours, for being a comedy, has a lot of darkness to it.
Yeah, I could see that. Let's see here. So that's really cool. Speaking of, maybe not as stressful. Music. There's a record label I like. I've been listening a lot to lately called Chill Hop Music. They do lo-fi hip hop, chill hop, kind of like calm, jazzy kind of hip hop music, mostly instrumental, not entirely. I like it. I've been listening to a lot lately. There's I'll link to the label's website, but they have playlists on Spotify and they're streaming things on YouTube.
So I mean, are you saying it's maybe a bit like vaporwave without the distortion or pictures of Macintosh computers?
Yes, yeah, sure. Whatever, if you'll give it a shot, sure.
I might.
Let's see here.
If you're lying to me, I know where you live.
That's true. You're not wrong. And finally, I do want to mention the other video game I've been playing a little of lately, Night in the Woods, which I mentioned earlier. The Lost Constellation minigame I really love. The main game, I haven't gotten very far into it, and it has a DDR rhythm kind of minigame in it, and I'm terrible at those, so that's kind of a point against it. But I enjoy the writing and the graphic design, the look of it a lot. I just hope that I hope you don't have to beat that mini game to progress in the main game, because I'm fucking terrible at that. I have to get Aaron to do it for me or something, because he's actually good at that shit.
Yeah. Never got big into Parappa?
Nope. Or DDR or any of the various Guitar Hero games or any of that. Just nope, not me. Too easily frustrated. So any other shout outs?
I think I'm good.
All right. So anecdotes, like I said, I've been running Ashen Stars. In the last session, as I mentioned earlier, the players in one group decided to steal this alien artifact that they found, which is this floating golden sphere. Emitted a weird signal, changes sizes every once in a while. They don't know what the fuck it does. And they take it to Dr. Lin Yama, who's on this death world. And I think I called it Duzak 3 or something like that. And Duzak 3, I said, was a death world, but even though it had a breathable atmosphere. So basically, in Ashen Stars, there's this whole intergalactic war that happened like 7 years ago. And that caused all this kind of damage. So on this planet, it was being terraformed when the war hit, and so the enemy, this alien species called the Mohilar, biobombed it and like caused all the vegetation to mutate. And then all the life just mutated. So like the vegetation is super. It's a death world because all the vegetation grows very fast, and it's like giant kudzu crossbred with Venus flytraps. So
do not want.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's called the death world for a reason. But there are some creatures do live. I said there are mega herbivores. They're just super mega elephants and mega sloths. And so the players, to get there, they land their shuttle on the landing pad, which was overgrown with vegetation. So they then improvise a flamethrower to clear the path. And then they see this giant sloth coming out of the forest in their way. So they're like freaking out. It's during a thunderstorm,
or at least walk briskly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's sort of their welcome to this world is seeing a 3-story tall sloth in their path that could crush them. And I don't want to hint too much more, but it's. I actually was for my the Ashen Stars campaign was originally all going to be set on this cowboy planet, Abundance 5. But then after doing the space opera episode or episode 148, I was like, no, let's vary it up. So now they're on a death world, and we'll see where they go next. And it was a lot of fun, and everyone else is having a lot of fun. Thomas 2 characters in the campaign, brothers who are the alien insect people.
Drink.
Yeah, weird. One of them is driven by a gourmand. He wants to try all the new food, and he has a food journal. So
by food, Does he mean sentient species?
No, it's actually in Ashen Stars that species has been engineered to not eat people. Like they genetically altered themselves so they would not be cannibals anymore.
Did Tom shed a single tear when he read that?
Yeah, a little bit.
All right.
But his other character is insect alien person who his drive is sexual adventure and has points in flirting. So, yeah.
Our little boy's growing up.
Yeah. So Tom got a Tom. And that's something to look forward to. After we finish Gate 9, I'll start posting that next. That'll be a mini episode or mini campaign. It won't be a super long campaign. And then after that, I think I'll start Tales from the Loop next.
Awesome.
I recently got the Our Friends the Machines adventure anthology of Tales from the Loop. It looks really cool.
Yeah, that's a really pretty book.
And the adventure book is just as pretty. So
yeah, I'm sure.
So yeah, that's something to look forward to. Anyways, any final thoughts, Bill?
No.
All right, this has been a labyrinth of an episode because it was linear. You'd listen to it, hopefully all. You didn't just skip around. Now you're at the center. You've gotten your pathway to wisdom. Here, okay, should not with a segment.
Now just use a more complex audio player and play this episode backwards to get back to where you started.
All right. Thanks for listening. Please check our Patreon at patreon.com/RPPR. Please rate and review us on iTunes or whatever podcasting software you're using. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.